And before this video begins, I'd just like to give a special thank you to my Asban Team level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. The art of parody is very difficult to pull off successfully. Sometimes it can go well. Movies like Airplane, Team America and Tropic Thunder come to mind. Excellent parodies of movie trends and societal attitudes. Then there are musical parodies like the excellent Weird Al Yankovic. But most of the time, parodies go very wrong, very embarrassingly so. I'm looking at you, disaster movie and anything made by the Nostalgia Critic. But amongst all the parodies out there, there's one I particularly love, an excellent, loving mockery of an entire Hollywood genre in possibly the most British way possible. It's a movie with gunfights, mysterious murders, old women getting kicked in the face, and a particular Italian frozen dessert. I am, of course, talking about Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg's Hot Fuzz, which my Diamond level patron Tom Hibbert commissioned me to review. This 2007 movie teams up odd couple Nicholas Angel and Danny Butterman as they try to take down an evil cult of nosy neighbours. But what makes this action comedy such a British classic? Well, grab your closest sea mine or actually just take a seat, because it's time to dive into the wonderful and weird world of Hot Fuzz.
What's the matter, Danny? You never taken a shortcut before?
Hot Fuzz is an incredible pastiche of the larger buddy cop action genre which became huge in the 80s and 90s. You know the kind of movie I'm talking about. Two worlds collide as one serious by-the-books cop is paired with a loose cannon with no respect for the rules. They butt heads but ultimately work together to defeat the big bad villain, realising that they're not too different after all and can actually be friends. It's a hugely successful genre, and it's clear that director Edgar Wright has always enjoyed these kinds of movies. Look no further than his amateur film Dead Right, made when Wright was just 18 years old on a shoestring budget of just £275. This short film is basically a police squad style Python-esque comedy parodying the Dirty Harry movies, and it's obviously very rough around the edges, but it's extremely impressive for what it is at the time it was made. It still feels so distinctly Edgar Wright with all the flair and style he would later become known for, just obviously a lot more raw and less refined than his professional films from later on. Anyway, the reason I bring it up here is because Hot Fuzz takes a lot of inspiration from it, shown by things like the supermarket setting and in-narrative references to the movies it's inspired by. Although that being said, it's a lot more slapstick and fourth wall breaking than Hot Fuzz. Like seriously, the villain just grabs Edgar Wright himself from behind the camera and shoots him, leading to the protagonist getting a random extra to take over as a director. It's amazing, and it's just interesting to see some of the ideas of Hot Fuzz rooted within this incredibly low-budget indie film from Wright, and it shows his long-standing passion for movies like this. When writing Hot Fuzz, Wright and Simon Pegg watched 138 cop-related films as inspiration, along with conducting 50 interviews with police officers, suggesting a really thorough approach and sense of realism within the film. It's a loving homage and parody to a genre Wright believed was sorely underrepresented within the UK, and yeah, it's a fair point. Whilst the UK has always had loads of cop shows like The Bill, The Sweeney, Z-Cars, etc., we never really had cop films up to this point. We usually had criminals and gangsters as the protagonists of those kinds of movies, which probably says a lot about our country, to be honest. Even the title is a great jab at classic action films with pretty meaningless titles. Wright specifically highlights Lethal Weapon, Point Break and Executive Decision as inspiration, with Pegg adding that most action film titles sound like they're generated with one adjective and one noun and then they call it a day. Even using a naming approach like this shows the type of parody Hot Fuzz is. It's not a snooty, holier-than-thou parody, it's not in the slightest bit mean-spirited or demeaning towards the genre it's making fun of. Instead of pointing at all the cliches and saying, oh look at that, isn't that silly? It willingly incorporates all the tropes it's commenting on and just has fun with it all. I don't think any other director and writer could get away with an over-the-top gunfight and brawl in a supermarket aisle. It's truly wonderful stuff. Edgar Wright's style of filmmaking lends itself perfectly to a movie like Hot Fuzz. He's known for his punchy style of montages, which we see throughout the film, like when Nicholas Angel is travelling to his new countryside job, along with all the arrests throughout the movie. It's very reminiscent of things like CSI, comically over-edited in the best way possible, emphasising how over the top this whole movie is for comedic effect. It's not only a way for Wright to incorporate his usual style of fast-paced editing, but it also allows him to poke fun at how overkill these kinds of movies are. but more on that towards the end. The humour of Hot Fuzz is truly top tier, with great jokes both within the fiction of the text and within how it's made in a meta sense. There's some great subtle humour throughout the movie, like the Sanford desk sergeants being twins, both played by comedian Bill Bailey. There's also a lot more overt comedic moments like the brilliant fence scene, which is of course a great callback to a similar gag in Shaun of the Dead a few years before. It works so well on multiple comedic levels, and it's topped off by things like the rogue swan giving Angel a brief moment of crisis on who to prioritise. You know, this runaway swan or this shoplifter. Any good buddy cop parody needs buddy cops, obviously, and Hot Fuzz absolutely does not disappoint in this department. The movie opens with a really fast-paced and stylistic montage giving us a look at the immensely talented, gung-ho police officer Nicholas Angel. I love how this establishes Angel as an overachiever who takes himself so seriously, his main defining character trait, all communicated in this quick way to tell us everything we need to know about the character. By the end of this minute or so long sequence, we immediately know everything about this man and what drives him. It's such a brilliant and effective character establishment, showing how career focused he is and how determined he is to be the best in every way possible. And also, just as a side note, shout out to Peter Jackson for stabbing Angel in the hand. Nicholas Angel is a very sympathetic, almost naive character in a sense. I mean, just look at his name. He's an angel. So determined to do the right thing and abide by the law and his own rigid ideas of right and wrong, but this is also his biggest flaw because he doesn't exist in a black and white world. He can't be solely focused on this one-man war against crime, if you will. Angel is essentially too good at his job, massively overachieving in London and ultimately getting in a bit of hot water because of it. As the higher-ups admit, he's been making them all look bad because his arrest record is 400% higher than theirs. There's actually a lot of accuracy in this kind of idea. There's unfortunately a real precedent out there for people getting sacked or reassigned because they're too good at their jobs. It skews all the percentages, messes up bonuses, and generally makes things bad for everyone else, so the people who are genuinely really good often get punished for it, which already introduces a light sense of corruption into the heart of Hot Fuzz, something that gets more and more prevalent later on in the movie. At the beginning of the movie, it's established that Angel only cares about his job, costing him his relationship with his girlfriend Janine. It's a good place to start the character. Often movies make the mistake of a character seemingly not actually existing until the movie begins, but here we're dropped right into the middle of things, our main character already having lost the woman he was even discussing marriage with. This is someone Angel clearly cares a lot about, or should care a lot about, so it means a lot to us as a viewer when she tells him he'll never be able to switch off until he finds a person he cares about more than his job. Hell, we even see it in this exact scene as Nicholas finds out Janine is now seeing someone else, implying this big emotional moment is about to happen as he tries to win her back, only for him to instead point out a detail in the crime scene, further proving how he's constantly only ever thinking about his job, and he's almost robotic in a sense, he can't process real emotion. I do appreciate how the movie doesn't make Janine the solution to this issue. She doesn't appear again for the entire movie after this point, emphasizing how over this relationship is, it's done. Shaun of the Dead was all about a bad boyfriend winning back the love of his partner, so I'm glad Hot Fuzz didn't do the same and just repeat that story. Instead, it's all about Angel finding a sense of balance in the form of his platonic friendship with Butterman, who becomes that person he can switch off for in a really powerful character arc. Indeed, Angel's partner is Constable Danny Butterman, the nepotism hire Angel himself arrested the night he arrived in Sanford. I love just how diametrically opposed these two are, they couldn't be further apart in how they operate. Angel is this gung-ho action hero with militaristic precision, and Butterman is a childish slob with almost no ambition. But his obsession with buddy cop movies shows us that Angel is essentially who Butterman wishes he could be. Obviously, Peg and Frost already have incredible chemistry with one another, but their characters are also written fantastically here. Their joint character journey is really effective as they learn to come together and work with one another, once again completely owning that buddy cop cliche and not hiding from it. There's a really sympathetic and sweet scene in the pub where we learn Angel's backstory. He reveals how he wanted to become a cop like his uncle, who ironically turned out to be a crooked cop. Foreshadowing! It's really important to get a more genuine side of Nicholas Angel, seeing the vulnerability underneath his hardened, tough guy exterior. We now see a starry-eyed child who wants to do good, despite everyone around him mocking him and looking down on him, something still happening even as an adult. However, Angel never lets himself falter to these pressures, always holding strong to his faith and determination to do the right thing and be an honest person as best as he can. It's a bit of a turning point for the movie, fleshing out Nicholas's character and showing the true person underneath. Up until this point, Angel has been very uptight and professional, but here he allows himself to get a bit drunk and crack a smile, loosening up a bit more on bonding with Danny. Danny could easily be a bad influence, but instead it's framed as a very positive thing, being that person to help Nicholas switch off for a bit. Of course, there's still the element of him adhering to the law, walking the drunken George merchant home, and refusing to take his money, but we genuinely do get to see a more human side to Nicholas as they have a movie night of the same buddy cop movies Hot Fuzz is parodying. This way of bringing them together as genuine people, and showing the humanity underneath Angel. He just needs to be shown the way. An interesting part of Hot Fuzz is how Angel initially looks down on Butterman, thinking of him as lesser because of his slobbish, drunkard nature. Of course, it is again classic buddy cop writing as the pair grow closer and closer. But Danny isn't some bumbling idiot. He may not have the same level of skill as Nicholas, but he's immensely loyal and always sticks up for Angel, not just to impress him, but because he genuinely respects him and considers him a friend. Even when the other officers are mocking Angel and playing pranks on him, Danny is always there right next to him to tell him to ignore it. It's a really sweet example of a genuine friendship, not the usual macho competitiveness of most buddy cop movies as they try to one-up each other and prove they're more manly. We see how Nicholas and Danny are influencing one another in positive ways, with the former loosening up a bit and the latter becoming more professional and learning real skills, so they both grow and develop because of their relationship being such a strong positive thing. After the climactic fight at the end, the Met Police practically begs Angel to come back and he denies them, which is the right call for the movie. After all, they betrayed his trust to begin with, kicking him out for being too good, and now they've come crawling back. You can't trust people like that. They would clearly do that again if they had the chance. So Angel is right to choose the people he's actually developed a bond and sense of camaraderie with, growing to love these people. It's not just Danny either. Nicholas has managed to grow close with everyone in the station despite the initial conflict, and he feels comfortable making jokes with them and engaging with banter rather than being so straight-laced and robotic, which was part of the reason they didn't like him to begin with. There's a great scene in the pub where Frank Butterman mentions that Angel is an outsider and how, they shouldn't trust him, but then the police force stick up for him, showing that they've grown past that kind of petty criticism of their new sergeant. There's a really nice scene near the end as they're all filling out paperwork and having a laugh together. They're still in work mode, of course, getting stuff done, but there's a sense of togetherness. Angel having been accepted and finally having worked out how he can switch off and have a bit of fun. It's the perfect conclusion to his character arc, and the moment also serves as a conclusion to Danny's story arc too, as Tom Weaver bursts in trying to kill Angel only for Danny to take the bullet like the action heroes he idolizes. It's another buddy cop cliche, of course, but as I've mentioned, this movie thrives on its shameless approach to cliches. Even the setting of Hot Fuzz is a bit tongue-in-cheek cliché, the classic big city cop forced to move to a small town with seemingly no issues. Due to Angel's exceptional performances at the Met, he is forcibly reassigned to the much quieter, quaint and stereotypical Sanford, which has won Village of the Year almost constantly. Sanford is established so well, this very mundane and boring place that could be literally anywhere in the UK. Seriously, these villages are actually everywhere, I'm not even joking, it's like a plague. Edgar Wright wanted a setting like this to contrast the action-packed narrative and also give it that very distinct UK feeling. However, if you're from the UK, you'll have learned from pretty much all media to never trust these kinds of impossibly idyllic rural places. It's a common horror movie trope at this point for quaint and peaceful British villages to actually be some kind of murder village, cannibal feeding ground or cult headquarters. So really, the twist at the end isn't all that surprising, but we'll get to that in a bit. I love the rural setting, somewhere so dull the big swanky highlight is a Summerfield supermarket. RIP. The co-op generation will never understand or experience the OG. I do like the glimpses we get of Sanford and its community, reinforcing how sweet and innocent this rural paradise seems to be. It has everything you'd expect. There's a cathedral, a small castle, small little shops, and everyone knows each other. It couldn't be any more different to the concrete jungle Angel is used to. Even the police station is like he's stepping into a different world. There's no evidence in the evidence room, a hedgehog in the abandoned riot gear room. I mean, come on, clearly he's their most dedicated officer, just leave him to it. And all the officers are generally just lazing about with nothing to do, eating cake. I love how it's established as being more like a regular office job than actual policing, further showing their lack of priorities and lackadaisical nature. There's a lot of great fish out of water comedy with this driving force of it being a different world, like Angel having his name misprinted as Angle and needing to chase down swans. Sorry, actually, it's just the one swan. It's all a great way of fleshing out the narrative and the world of the movie, with Angel seemingly the only one to ever take anything seriously because everyone else is too comfortable and uncritical of the world around them. One of my favourite early moments in the film is when Angel and Butterman travel to the farm of David Bradley's character Arthur Webley, who has an impossible to understand accent requiring a double translation. It's a very brief joke, but it's absolutely brilliant because everyone in the UK can understand and relate to it. Despite being such a small nation, we have endless variations of accents and dialects.
Tomorrow.
With some completely incomprehensible like this one.
What I'm saying is that, like, they had themselves proper jobs, you know, for a gun till, then they wouldn't date. You know, a lot of them's from broken homes.
Sorry, that was just a noise.
This scene is made even funnier, however, when Webley reveals his comical armoury containing a literal sea mine. Again, this is a very UK-centric joke, as absurd as it is, because farmers do have a bit of a reputation here for owning endless firearms and God knows what else. But I like how it's the way Hot Fuzz can justify having all these big explosive weapons for the climax, compared to American cops who probably get a sea mine as an academy graduation present. There's a really good piece of foreshadowing during a patrol scene early on, where Angel shows Butterman to always look closer at the people around them. Of course, this is initially framed as paranoia from being in the big city, but it's actually very accurate because of the wider machinations going on under their noses. I mean, on Angel's first night, he kicks a bunch of underage drinkers out of the pub, only for the owners to utter those iconic words, "for the greater good." These lines are initially framed as innocent throwaway lines, you know, not much to think about, but they're later exposed as the very mantra of the cult lurking underneath, showing how they're almost bragging about their status and influence because they're so comfortable and confident in their ability to hide in plain sight. Again, because no one around them is critical of their world. The most obvious example of this is cackling villain Simon Skinner, played by Bond legend Timothy Dalton, which is funny because Skinner himself is essentially a rural village version of a James Bond villain, complete with his own incredibly strong henchmen. Skinner's very first line in the entire movie is an admission that he's a slasher, only to then play it off as a joke about slashing prices. Every time he sees Angel, he makes these jokes, getting more and more explicit about his murderous tendencies and intent. The ludicrous nature of all these jokes almost sets Skinner up as a red herring of sorts, because there's no way the actual villain would be so flagrant about this, right? So it's a genius double bluff by Wright. This is a villain that's so comfortable and secure in his villainy that he knows he can literally brag about it to the actual police force because there's no risk of him actually getting caught or facing consequences. Skinner is such a great villain, Dalton plays him absolutely perfectly, really making him feel so smug and despicable. It's brilliantly done. Early on in the movie, we're introduced to the Neighbourhood Watch Alliance, a group of concerned citizens looking out for one another to keep the village safe and orderly, something everyone in the UK can again relate to. Whether it's the actual Neighbourhood Watch or the dreaded PTA, there's always some kind of group of citizens politicking and being nosy neighbours. I like how throughout the movie they're shown to be constantly communicating with one another, softly sowing the seeds of them being a cultish organisation with eyes on the entire village. It starts off innocently enough, just another example of Angel being a fish out of water and having to deal with all these quirks of rural life, but things take a big turn around the 38-minute mark, with the ominous spectre of a hooded axe murderer killing Blower and Draper. I really appreciate how we see this happening, along with seeing all the other deaths, making the cover-ups obvious to us, but not to Sergeant Angel. This is a brilliant technique called dramatic irony, where the audience knows about events the main characters don't. What we know ourselves is merely a suspicion by Angel, who knows something isn't right but can't prove it, and his attempts to investigate further are blocked by his fellow officers who look down on him as being a big shot city dweller coming after their jobs and treating them like idiots. Us already knowing it's a cover-up allows us to see just how skilled Angel really is, because we already have the information, but he has to work for it the hard way, and him doing so with such ease is proof that he's earned his reputation. A big turning point comes with the horrific murder of Tim Messenger, which is a lot less ambiguous than the previous deaths. As the audience, we know that these have all been murders, but we don't know who has been doing it or why, and Angel still isn't certain they're murders at all. However, thanks to Tim's horrific death and Skinner's convenient lack of appearance at the tombola, Angel finally starts piecing things together, but once again, nobody listens to him. This is the disruption of the narrative. Angel's relationship with Butterman hitting a speed bump as they argue to the fitting backdrop of a rainstorm, with Angel once again putting his job first. This is of course necessary for the genre and the overall parody of buddy cop movies, since they all have the dramatic moments of the main duo arguing arguing and then trying to go it alone, but I appreciate how short it is in this story. They don't try to milk it or drag it out for ages. It's resolved pretty quickly with all the same triumph as the boys get back to work. It's absolutely brilliant seeing Angel in his flow, in his perfect environment, putting it all together as he tries to arrest Skinner. The logic is absolutely sound, it all works perfectly, like the denouement of an Agatha Christie murder mystery. Everything fits together so well, you could even say Angel has Skinner dead to rights, and it's really satisfying to watch the montage of the casework and the deaths through the lens of it being Skinner, seeing how it all fits together and comes together. But of course that slippery Mr. Skinner was busy stretching his calves on the windowsill and has a perfect alibi. It's brilliantly frustrating to watch as a viewer, because we feel exactly the way Angel is. The idea that we know what's going on, yet the sound logic is being laughed off as paranoia and delusion. Even the crooked Inspector Butterman gaslights Angel as jumping at shadows because of his city background. However, it's actually the NWA's comfort and sense of stability that actually undoes them, because a simple slip up by Annette gives Angel the inspiration to entertain the notion of there being multiple killers, something he wasn't thinking of at first because he was so honed in on the very obvious Mr. Skinner. Indeed, we end up finding out that the whole NWA is in on it, a hooded cult gathering in the castle. As I've already mentioned, the truth was there right from the beginning, just obscured by the mundanity of village life. The camera system, the walkie-talkies, the hatred of a living statue. Even the NWA meeting Angel attended was coded as being a bit weird and sinister. Everyone sat at this dark round table, so it's nice to see the full-blown version of that. The cult uncloaked and no longer having to hide their true colours anymore. It's a fantastic visual, openly embracing the most stereotypical idea of village cults, and I really appreciate the subversion of their motives. This isn't some ancient tradition of killing outsiders to maintain the old order or to resurrect Cthulhu. The truth is simply that the NWA will do anything to retain their prestigious Village of the Year award. They're willing to kill Blower for holding back the Drama Society, Merchant for having an unbecoming mansion, Messenger for tabloid journalism and spelling mistakes, and lastly, Tiller for simply wanting to move away. There's a disturbing sense of self-importance and delusion within the NWA, so desperate to maintain their reputation against all the odds, rather ironically not actually seeing the bigger picture of the greater moral good. And of course, the leader of the NWA is none other than Frank Busman himself, because once again, in any British folk horror movie, the policeman is always in on it. Butterman explains that this whole thing came about because his wife Irene was obsessed with winning the Village of the Year award, only for travellers to move into town the night before and ruin their chances. This loss driving her over the edge and making her kill herself. I saw an interesting theory on YouTube that Irene reflects Angel himself in a way. She took her life because she was a perfectionist, so determined to make the village the best that it consumed her. So when she failed, she lost her mind. This is a bit similar to Angel's own perfectionism as an officer. He's a chronic overachiever who wants to be the best and do everything right, which consumes him and costs him his relationship with Janina. His inability to get everything perfectly right at Sanford sends him into a downward spiral throughout the movie because he can't prove his theories, even starting to doubt himself because he's so sure of his abilities and his sense of right and wrong, but everyone's treating him like he's going crazy, which then ironically makes him go crazy a bit. Angel's loss of identity threatens to entirely consume him, just like it did for Irene. As the YouTube comment surmises, the core message of this film is about striking the right balance between work and play. Nicholas needs Danny to serve as a counterbalance, someone to keep him anchored to reality and humanity as a whole. Danny himself is a flawed person, but that keeps Nicholas sane, whilst Nicholas is a super professional real-life hero who gives Danny motivation to be better. They need one another for their sense of identity and their motivation to keep going and constantly growing. Throughout the movie, there's a growing implication that Angel's predecessor met an unfortunate end, something initially explained away as being a nervous breakdown, but as Angel uncovers more and more of the NWA conspiracy, it becomes obvious he was killed before he could do anything. It's one of those things that works really well in hindsight, because you notice all these hints, like the nervous breakdown excuse and mentions of his metaphorical grave. It's only when Angel falls into the castle's catacombs and comes face to face with all the recent victims of the NWA that we find out the truth that his predecessor was killed, along with all the use from the start of the movie and even the living statue. It's a horrifying visual that emphasises the depravity of the NWA and the disturbing lengths they'll go to for their means, or rather, for the greater good. I think it's really sad how Danny himself doesn't even know what's going on. He has a really naive and innocent perspective of the NWA because of his dad, showing that the cover-up is so extensive that even those directly related to the cult members don't know the truth, and think it's just a little club that gives ne'er-do-wells a stern-talking talking to. It leads to a really emotional farewell between Nicholas and Danny, the latter trying to save the former because there's nothing they can do against the immensely influential NWA. But this is where their joint character arc works so well, because Nicholas realizes he can't just run away, he has to go back and stop this scheme, not just because it's the right thing to do for the law, but because he doesn't want to leave his buddy alone in a place like that. It's those same exact buddy cop movies that inspire Angel to go back, showing Danny's influence on him and how Angel has now found someone to care about. I love the action scenes when Angel returns to Sanford. Edgar Wright is an absolutely superb action director, and that's on full display as he dials things up to 11, unashamedly having Angel become a Hollywood badass, loading up with guns to a comical extent and riding into town like a wild western sheriff. This scene is absolutely incredible, with such amazing tension as Angel arrives in the village square, all his enemies waiting and then comically producing guns from hiding places, just like Angel had mentioned earlier with the long green coat. It's got to be one of the best cop shootout parodies this side of the Naked Gun. I mean, hell, they give us a bicycle drive-by. How can you keep a straight face after that? It perfectly nails every cliche of a buddy cop climax, with guns blazing, dramatic music blasting, and a wonderfully disorientating amount of camera cuts. It even manages to fit in the cliches of a hand-to-hand duel with the partner unable to shoot, and the classic bulletproof vest fake-out. One of my favourite details actually is in the pub, when Roy has a double-barreled shotgun and just keeps shooting it without needing to reload ever, further heightening the beautiful lack of realism of it all. It takes the ludicrous insanity of Hollywood action movies and completely owns it without a hint of shame. Indeed, Hot Fuzz is a bit of a commentary on policing overkill. It's something unironically glorified in a lot of cop movies, showing these swaggering heroes bringing in tanks and rocket launchers to like a drug bust, with increasingly higher stakes and a bigger scale to the story. But Hot Fuzz playfully mocks that with its approach, this hyper-exaggerated war between the police and the NWA, which is all just old people. There's just something so wonderfully dissonant about all this chaos happening in the most idyllic and charming place possible. It's not the mean streets of Skid Row, it's not a gang boss's warehouse at the docks, it's just a lovely little village square, and that helps to emphasize the sheer ludicrous comedy of it all, especially as the Reverend comes out blasting, of all people. Angel starts off this whole movie doing things by the book, making sure everything is done right and proper, but by the end with this climax, you know, he's encouraging youths to graffiti, going wild with the gunfights, one-liners and aviators, this Hollywood hero leaving all the paperwork for the end. It's really well done, the movie getting more and more absurd as it goes on, and the rollercoaster ride is so wonderful to be on. The entire movie comes to a head in the model village, with the rather fitting visual of Angel and Skinner kaiju fighting in the village they're battling for control over. However, Angel comes out on top and Skinner gets impaled in such a horrific way, like Jesus, that looks painful. Although for obvious reasons, it is fitting that he slips on a Summerfield van. Also, I really love how the model church spy stays in his chin even when he's being booked into the police station much later on. It's such a great comedic touch. I guess the paramedics just left it there and he somehow managed to get out of the hospital without anyone taking that whole thing out. It's just a permanent fixture of Skinner's face now. I think it's quite fitting that Danny's role in the climax is the dilemma of going against his dad, his own flesh and blood. He's the one to help his dad out the car, only to then become a hostage for it. I think it's a perfect example of how deluded Frank is in his goals as a leader of the NWA. He didn't care when the police force turned against him in the pub because he only ever saw them as pawns. But threatening his only child is a whole new level of evil villainy. Danny being unable to shoot his dad is obviously a reference to his favourite moment in Point Break, as shown earlier in the movie. But it's also a way to show how different the two Buttermans are when it comes to morality and their sense of right and wrong. It's so hard to pull the trigger when it's someone you love, regardless of what they've done. But Frank doesn't have that sense of empathy and humanity compared to Danny, who can't bring himself to do it because that's his dad. It's all he has, and he still hasn't had the chance to reconcile these two very different sides of Frank. He hasn't been able to process the true dark side of his father, so it's a really powerful moment of humanity, and you can feel for his frustration in the moment because, you know, he wants to do it, but he just can't. But hey, that swan saves the day. You know, that reminds me of the classic quote, "Don't show a swan in Act 1 if it won't come up again in Act 3. It was the answer all along, hiding in plain sight. Chekhov's swan was the key to everything. Hot Fuzz is one of my absolute favourite comedy movies. It's a truly perfect parody of very serious, macho Hollywood buddy cop movies. It wholeheartedly embraces all the tropes and cliches of the genre, using them to craft this brilliant masterpiece of cinema. Rather than two ripped badasses carrying out drug busts in Miami, Hot Fuzz is a try-hard, emotionally distant loser and a schlubby drunkard fighting against pensioners in Gloucestershire, and that's absolutely perfect. Like Simon Pegg said in an interview, it's not a spoof because it doesn't have that sneer looking down on the source material. It's actually looking up at it. It's still a parody at the end of the day, but the sincerity and heart behind it ascends it into a genuinely good movie, never relying on its nature as a parody, like stuff like Disaster Movie. It's full of very snappy editing, dialogue and action without ever losing sight of its nature as playfully poking at a very American-led genre. It's so quintessentially British in every way, and its Doctor Who actor per movie ratio is probably the highest of the Cornetto trilogy, which is excellent news. The NWA cult twist is fantastically seeded and achieved, pushing the concept to its most ridiculous and comedic limits, and then blasting past those too. Timothy Dalton's Mr. Skinner is a wonderful villain, and of course, Peg and Frost have their natural chemistry on full display, never needing to force any jokes or compete with one another for screen time. They're the perfect odd couple for a movie like this. I adore Shaun of the Dead, but Hot Fuzz is absolutely my favourite of the Cornetto trilogy. It just achieves so much and works so perfectly in every way. Even the soundtrack is incredible and fits perfectly. It's one of those movies that will always be pretty timeless and an eternally quotable, rewatchable modern classic, if a 17-year-old movie can even be described as modern. I'm getting old. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and a big thank you again to Tom Hibbert for commissioning this review. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez, my Diamond level patron Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons Matthew Burns and Maximilian Foreman, and all my Gold level patrons Daniel Shillito, Francois AK Line Vortex, Lee Marie Farrell, Thomas R, and Thomas Price. Thank you so much for your support.